Hi, my name is Joe Giannotti, and I am the Junior Academic Super Bowl question writer for Language Arts for English. And this year's topic, as you know, is the end of the second millennium, the 1980s and 1990s, which I think is a terrific topic. It's the decades that probably most of us grew up in, and I think it's great for the kids to learn about the culture from these two decades. I think that in social studies and in fine arts and in science, they're going to learn so much about these 20 years, and I think that's great. They'll get a little bit of that in our section of the competition. Our novel, of course, is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I really wish that I could have found something that spoke to 80s and 90s culture more than Harry Potter, because of course there isn't any. I mean, Harry Potter could have been written in any decade. um, but there weren't any suggestions from coaches that worked. There were a couple, but they had sexual situations in them that made the book inappropriate for middle school. And as you know, it's difficult to find a YA novel in the last 30 or 40 years that doesn't have some type of sexual situation in it. And unfortunately, I think that's because the novels are realistic and they reflect the world that we live in, which can be unfortunately terrible at times. And so we wanted to play it safe. Harry Potter, even though it is a novel that could have been written in the 2000s or in the 2010s just as easily as it was written in the 90s, Harry Potter is the third highest selling novel in the history of the world. Only A Tale of Two Cities and The Little Prince have sold more copies than Harry Potter. And Harry Potter's sequels make up the majority of the 10 novels that rank after Harry Potter. So I do think that it's a worthy book. And I do think that it represents the 1990s well, even if the kids aren't going to necessarily get anything culturally about the 1990s from it. It will be 60% of the competition, and that means that it will be 15 out of 25 questions every time that you go and compete. There are 6 ancillary texts, all links, all on the internet, that you can use to have, I hope, robust, almost collegiate conversations with your kids about this book. I realize that the reading level of Harry Potter will be easy for even sixth graders, let alone eighth graders. But there's something magical about Harry Potter. This is not my genre at all. I am not a fantasy book reader. And I read this book first probably about 20 years ago, and then I taught it to freshmen for a little while. And even though maybe the Lexile is a little low, I do think that there's something special. I have a hard time articulating what is so great about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but I just remember reading it and thinking, wow, this is better than anything I read in my childhood. There was something. Perhaps it's because Harry is so relatable to so many kids, and I think so are Hermione and Ron, his two friends in the book, his two primary friends in the book. So I think maybe that's why it appeals so much. But there's something magical about Harry Potter, and I hope that you'll be able to have great conversations about it. There are college courses that just focus on the Harry Potter novels, so I think that it can rise to the level that you need it to rise to. And I think that the 6 ancillary links that we've included will help stoke those conversations for you. There won't be questions specifically about the links. All of the questions will be about the novel, and it would be possible to answer all of the questions by just reading the novel. I do think, however, that you should strongly consider discussing the 6 other links that are provided, because even though there aren't questions specifically about them, I think that they will create conversation about Harry Potter that will make it easier for students to remember various plot points in the novel. So I do think that they're worthy of discussion. Maybe 6 different practices. You discuss one at each practice, and I do think that it will add to the students' ability to remember a lot of the plot points in Harry Potter. As far as the questions go, there's not very many that are interpretative. A few, but not too many. Most of them will focus on the plot, the settings of the story, and then the characters in the story. Most of the questions are factual. I think that students should probably read the book more than once. I would say reading the book at least twice is a good idea. I'm not trying to be nitpicky in my questions. I ask plot questions that I think take place in major scenes of the novel, memorable scenes of the novel. I have seen the movie, and I think that it would be great to show the movie. The movie leaves out a lot that happens in the novel, and so watching the movie obviously isn't enough to answer all of the questions that will be asked in the competitions. But the movie is good, and I don't think that it strays necessarily from the novel. It just leaves a lot out. So again, most of the questions will not be very debatable. They will be fairly factual. There are some interpretative questions, and they revolve around the themes of the novel, such as prejudice and bullying and things like that. So hopefully the students will find this to be very fair. I will not ask a single vocabulary question about the novel, and IACE will provide a list of words that are used, and the words won't just be literary devices, but they'll be any word that I think I use that a student might not know the meaning of, and I'm very loose in that definition of the list of words that I've created. I think a lot of the words that I included on the list, students actually will know, but I wanted to be sure. I do not want this to be a competition where if the student doesn't understand a word in the question stem or a word that's one of the answer choices, I don't want that to be what stops them from winning the competition or from doing their best in the competition. I firmly believe that this should be a competition about the literature and not necessarily about vocabulary, at least when it comes to the longer works. So that is 60% of our competition. The other 40% comes from the poet Louise Gluck's The Wild Iris, which won the Pulitzer Prize in the 1980s and 90s. And Gluck, of course, I think it's been 4 years now, won the Nobel Prize, and she's one of only, I think, 6 Americans to have ever won it. She's the third woman, female American to win it. Pearl Buck won it, and Toni Morrison won it, and now Louise Gluck has won it as well. I think I'm accurate on that. So 40% of our questions will come from the Wild Iris, and that means 10 out of 25 will be in each competition. I didn't include any ancillary texts with the Wild Iris because I think that the poems are challenging enough on their own, and I think that you'll easily be able to have some great conversations about the poems. We will not be studying the entire book. I chose 10 poems out of the book. Nature, the outdoors, relationships, especially like loving relationships, and by that I mean like marriage, or the relationship between parents and children, are the themes throughout all of the poems in the Wild Iris. And I do think that your students could read, if you give them this book, I think that they can read every single poem in the book, and you don't have anything to worry about. There isn't anything objectionable in the book. There's no language or anything like that. I think that as adults, as coaches reading these poems, it's possible to see some of the metaphors, but I don't think that the students will. I mean, it's nature, right? So there will be some metaphors in there that have to do with topics that perhaps you don't want to bring up. But I don't think that the students will see that at all. I think they'll see nature as nature. I think these are absolutely wonderful poems. I actually was inspired after reading The Wild Iris. I purchased the collected works of Louise Gluck, which, as you can imagine, she's been writing poetry for 50 years, and there's quite a bit, and I read it cover to cover. I can't say that I read all of them closely. That would take forever to do that. But she's a terrific poet, and not somebody that I studied actually in college, and not somebody that I've ever taught. But if the next time I teach poetry, I would definitely pick up some Louise Gluck. I included the first few words of each line after the title because some of the titles are repeated. As you can see, even in our list, Matins is repeated 3 times, and some of the others have the same title. Some of the other poems in the book that we're not reading have the same titles as some of the poems that we are reading. So I wanted to include the first few words there so that everybody was reading exactly the right stuff. So in the past, I don't think this is my 4th year writing, and I don't think I've asked anyone to purchase a book to this point. I might be wrong about that, but I don't think that I have. Everything has been online thus far. This year, however, the 2 books combined on Amazon can be purchased for $20 total between the 2 or less. There are online versions of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone that you could read, and obviously those would be free. If you can find Louise Gluck's The Wild Iris online, then you are a much better researcher than me. I don't think there's going to be a way to get around purchasing The Wild Iris. Of course, I recommend purchasing Harry Potter as well. I think it was $7 on Amazon. But again, there are online versions of the full text of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. IACE will provide you, I've created some help sheets and some links that IACE will provide you with. One of the help sheets is a list of, as I said, all of the words. There are vocabulary questions when it comes to the poems. As I've said in the past, I do think it's fair to ask students to know the meanings of every single word in the poems, because poetry is pared down to its bare essentials, right? And so if Gluck uses a word in one of the 10 poems that we're reading, she's used it for a reason. And I think that students should be held accountable for knowing all of the words in the poetry. I think that would be absolutely impossible to do in a longer work, but I think that in the poems that we've included, it's a pretty doable task. So I think that again, there are some vocabulary questions for Gluck, even though there are not any vocabulary questions for J.K. Rowling. Also, again, like I said, included on that word list is any word that I use in the question stem or as an answer that I'm worried that students might not know yet. But there's also, if I use any literary terms, those are on the list as well. Most of the Gluck questions, I should have said this on the last slide, but most of the Gluck questions will also be factual. So if students can read those poems, again, they're not that long. There are 10 of them, obviously, but most of them are about a page long. So you're looking at about, I would say, 12 to 13 pages worth of poetry total. And I think that students should read them 9, 10, 11 times each. They really should. And I think a discussion on each poem, even if it's just one discussion on each poem, would probably be enough to get students through the competition and to get them prepared as best as possible. So, our theme is the 80s and the 90s. I hope that you have a good time with Harry Potter, and I hope that the students find, and I hope that you find the Louise Gluck poems to be rich and excellent, and I think that they're very well written, and hopefully you'll have a great time with this year's topic throughout all of the different subject areas in our competition.